So welcome again to the Princeton Reviews webinar, What's the Deal with AP Exams and SAT Subject Tests. My name is Anna, and I am with our National Marketing Department, and I'll be introducing our presenter in just a few moments. But before I do, I wanted to just go over some quick housekeeping things with you, and then we'll go right into the beginning of our presentation this evening. So for those of you on the line, just note that your lines are muted completely, so I cannot hear you. If you did want to say something, share something, have a question, please use the question chat box, which is on your GoToWebinar control panel, and you can go ahead and submit any questions, and we will do our best to make sure that we can get to your questions during this session. The second thing that I did want to share with you guys before we get started is that this session is being recorded. So all attendees and all the folks that have registered for this session will be receiving an email from the Princeton Review about 24 to 48 hours after tonight's session, so in the next 1 or 2 days, and that will have the recording link, which will be posted on our website. So let us move on. What I like to do is just give you a little sense of where I am for this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter, James. So again, my name is Anna, and I'm actually located out of our Long Island area offices, and James, who will be our presenter for this evening, he's actually located out of our Boston area. And so we're just going to go ahead and hand this right over to James. Welcome, James.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Anna. Thanks for attending, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. You can see a little bit of background about me on screen right now. I think the probably most relevant thing for you to know is that I have been tutoring for the Princeton Review for about 20 years now. The two APs that I tutor most frequently are AP US History and the English Lit exam. I have done English language some, and I've done world history a little bit, but it's mostly US History and English Lit. So those are the ones I could draw on most directly. Let's just go ahead and jump right into things here. But while I'm talking, though, if everybody in the audience could just simply identify who they are by grade or parent. So in other words, if you're a freshman, if you could just type a 9 in the text message box. If you're sophomore, 10, I think you get the idea. If you're a parent, let's just go ahead and throw a P in there, just so we have a sense of who's in there and what kind of interests you have based on whether or not you're a high school student, whether or not you're a parent, or even if you're in grade school, you can just simply put a G for grade school.
We're getting mostly 10s and 11s.
That's good. If you're a senior at this point, it might be a little bit late in the game, although not entirely too late in the game to be thinking about an AP strategy. You're probably thinking more about the AP exam. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about the AP exams first, and then we're going to run through the SAT subject test. I'm thinking that that'll probably take somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 to 30 minutes. Then we'll speak a little bit about timelines. In other words, when should you take APs? When should you take subject tests? Talk finally a little bit about what the Princeton Review can help you to do to prepare for subject tests and for AP exams, and then we'll end with a question and answer session, probably about 10 minutes or so. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. So beginning with just simply what are AP exams. It's, I think, always smart to assume that people on this webinar don't know that much about it. I know some of you are deeply knowledgeable, but I'm assuming a kind of entry-level level of knowledge on this. So we'll begin with the simple definition of, so an AP exam is a test that tests you on college-level material, but it's taught in a high school classroom. So the idea of the AP exam is that you'll typically take an AP course during the year, and then in May, you'll take your AP exams, and they're supposed to basically measure the degree to which you mastered college-level material. One thing to note is that AP classes in high school are a little different from a college-level class in that they tend to meet more frequently, they have more slowly paced assignments, and your high school teacher tends to watch over you a little bit more than, say, a high school professor might. They are, as I mentioned a second ago, taken in school during the first 2 weeks of May. This always times out somewhat painfully for the May SAT. The May SAT typically falls either right before AP exams or right in the middle of AP exams. This year it's going to be right smack in the middle of AP exams. So it's sometimes a challenge to prep for both of them. I think the smart thing you want to do is you want to prep for the SAT far enough in advance that by the time you get to May, you're really already ready to go on that. 2.6 million exams were taken in 2016. So that's 2.6 million exams. That's not 2.6 million people who took exams. The average number of exams that a person takes when they take an AP exam is 1. So that there are a lot of people who take these exams, but there are also many people who take 2, 3, 4, 5. That number has grown tremendously. I can't give you the exact number on that, but it wasn't too long ago. Certainly 10 years ago, there weren't even 1 million people taking AP exams. So that number has grown a lot in the past even 5 years, which is why some people tend to be more interested in, all right, what role does the AP play in college admissions? The deadline for registration is March 24th. The cost for the exam is $93. At some schools, they'll help you pay that cost. If you are eligible for fee waiver, even more so, some schools will help you pay that cost. But generally speaking, in most schools, you will need to pay the cost of the exam yourself. The question sometimes comes up, well, what if I want to take an AP exam and it's not offered at my school? That is possible to do. What you need to do is you call the College Board. College Board is the organization that runs AP exams and subject tests, as it turns out. You call them, and they'll give you a list of schools and AP coordinators in your area. The problem with it this year is you need to call by March 1. So we've already missed the deadline for getting into an AP exam that's not at your school, but for those planning ahead, let's say your school doesn't offer AP exams and there are plenty of schools that still don't, you still can take an AP. You'll just need to call the College Board before March 1st of, say, next year to take an AP exam. AP exams typically last between 2 and 3 hours. There are 2 sections on all AP exams. There's the multiple choice and free response questions. So multiple choice is going to be familiar from all the tests you've ever taken in school. You've got 5 answer choices to choose from. There is a guessing penalty on the questions. The free response section is the second half of the exam. On AP US History, for instance, you'll have a document-based question where they give you documents, you work with, and you write an essay, and then you have to write 2 more essays, one on the kind of first half of American history, one on the second half of American history. What a lot of people don't know is that the free response questions typically count for more than the multiple choice questions. So if you really, really knock it out of the park on the free response questions, it can make up for weakness in multiple choice. The reverse is not really so true. Even if you do incredibly well on the multiple choice questions, the free response questions still count for a larger portion of your score. I mention this because in prepping for the test and getting ready for the AP, some teachers put more emphasis on the multiple choice questions. Some teachers put more emphasis on the free response questions, giving you practice free response questions to do. I can't advise too much that you should practice the free response questions. They're always daunting. They're always challenging the first time you try a free response question. But with practice, they become comfortable and familiar. But again, only with practice. The free response questions are scored by high school and college teachers in June. All over the country, teachers gather for a week. They sit at tables together, and they grade the same essay again and again and again for 4 or 5 days at a run. One of the things you want to make sure you're doing with your essay is that you're writing it in a clean, clear, easy fashion. Good handwriting absolutely matters because you just might have that grader who on Thursday afternoon is feeling a little bit worn out. You know, maybe they're grading in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's 103 degrees. This is a true story. I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and met a bunch of AP graders. You want to make their lives as easy as possible. So content matters, but so does the form as well. The exam scores are from 1 to 5, I think, as most people know. 3 is considered a passing score, right? So a qualifying score is a 3. For schools that give you some kind of credit, either course credit. We can talk about this more in a little bit. Either course credit or let you, say, get out of a prerequisite in one of their core requirements. Oftentimes they're looking for a 4 or a 5. So 3 is the number you're shooting for as a minimum, but really if you want it to help in college, you're looking more for a 4 or 5. Talk more about that in a few minutes. You get your scores in July. So one thing to think about there is, all right, I get my scores in July. What effect does your AP score have on getting into college when you're a senior? That's right. It has no effect on getting into college when you're a senior. Okay, so the scores are going to come out in July after your senior year. You'll have been accepted to college. You'll have paid your deposit. You may have paid your tuition already at that point. The APs that you take as a senior, the scores on the exam are not going to have any effect on getting into college. The scores on other exams can indeed have an effect, and again, that's something we'll come back to in just a couple minutes. But again, the timeline is you take the tests in early May, they get scored in June, you'll get your scores back in July. There are 38 AP subjects. There's almost an AP for everything nowadays. What are the ones that people take most frequently, that are offered most frequently? Here's the list here of the ones that are offered the most in high school. So this list of 10 tests here are the 10 APs that are offered in the most high schools. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones that are taken most frequently. They just, more schools offer these than any of the other tests. I put that out there so you can think, all right, so if I'm in a competitive pool at a selective school, these are the tests that they're most likely going to have available to them. So taking a Japanese AP, for instance, is a good idea if you're strong in Japanese, but you're not going to have much competition in that realm because there are only a few hundred people each year who take the Japanese. Here's your list of most taken exams. I just realized there's a mistake on the top there. It shouldn't say English on number 3. It shouldn't say English language. It should say English literature. So number 1 is English language, 2 is U.S. history, 3 is English literature. These, again, are the 10 exams that are taken most frequently. Why is it worth noting which ones are taken the most? Again, thinking about making yourself competitive if you're applying to a selective college. So let's say I'm applying to a selective school and I'm planning to major in psychology. Knowing that psychology is one of the most commonly taken APs, and I'm wondering if I should take it at my school offers a AP psychology class, I probably should, right? If I'm planning to major in psychology and I have this as an option and lots of other people are taking psychology, it makes good sense for me to take this exam. The 2 newest APs are computer science principles class. That's typically taken by 9th or 10th graders. So this is an introduction to computer science. And then the other one that's been recently introduced is the AP capstone course. This is generally taken over 10th and 11th grade. The idea behind this course is to introduce students to kind of college level research and college level reading in preparation for taking AP classes in junior or senior year. At this point, not a ton of students are taking the AP capstone. It's only, again, I believe under 1,000 students are taking it, but it is something that the College Board is certainly pushing, and your school may offer it, and it does actually present itself as a decent opportunity to get introduced to college level work on a range of subjects. So, why should I take an AP exam, right? This is why we're here, essentially. What's the usefulness of taking an AP exam? One thing you can do, certainly, is help you prepare for college. So by working on harder material, it can help you get ready for the material, for the work that you would do in, say, an intro-level course in calculus or an intro-level course in English literature. So it can help you just simply be better prepared for school because you're working at a higher level and doing the kind of writing, especially, and the amount of reading that you should expect to see once you get into college. The other thing it can do is help you, of course, stand out, right? So this is an important question. how much do APs actually help in the admissions process? Well, they can help you stand out by doing really well on exams. So that's one way they can help you stand out. They can also help you measure up, because if you're applying to a school which is again very, very selective, you should expect that many students are going to be taking AP exams. So, if you're applying to a place like Amherst, if you're applying to a place like Claremont McKenna, or one of the UC schools, a lot of other students are going to be taking APs. There's going to be a fairly strong expectation. If you're applying to a less competitive school, it can really help you stand out. Now, how does it help you stand out? I think there's a distinction to be made here in taking AP classes between the exam score and taking the class. There's no hard line on this, but certainly speaking to a lot of college admissions people that I know, including on both the high school and the college side, the consensus view seems to be that taking the AP is more important. Taking an AP class is even more important than the score you get on the exam. Everybody's going to be happy if you get 4s or 5s, especially on AP exams. If you apply to school and you've got 4 or 5s on your APs, and that's certainly going to help. It's not going to hurt you in any way whatsoever. What's more important, though, is the idea of curriculum. So college admissions people all agree on 2 things mattering for getting into college: taking tough classes and getting good grades. Okay? So taking tough classes means that you are going to that you chose to take classes that would challenge you and take the hardest level classes that you could handle at your school. So if you go to a school and they don't offer APs, and there are plenty of schools that don't, that's not going to hurt you in any way whatsoever. But if you're at a school that does offer APs and you graduate without a single one on your record, that could be something of a mark against you. At the same time, you wouldn't want to take an AP class or 4 or 5 AP classes that overload you, so you can't possibly get the work done and you suffer by taking on too much. So the basic point here is, if your school offers APs and you're hoping to, if your school offers APs, let's get that a little bit there. If your school offers APs and it's an area that you are planning to do work on in college, or if it's an opportunity for you to challenge yourself, let's say you're planning to be science major, but you think, maybe I can handle that English literature class, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and take that AP class. You don't need to take 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 AP classes. People do, but you don't need to. You probably want to have something in the order of 1 or 2 per year, right? More is not harmful unless it actually hurts your performance, unless it, unless it creates too much work so you can't keep up. The other things an AP class can do can, of course, enrich your intellect. More challenging work, harder material can actually be an enriching experience, and I don't want to take anything away from that as well. I mean, the joy of going to college is the joy of learning, and you do that in high school already, but you can do it at probably an even more advanced level in an AP class. The final thing here to mention is that it can also reduce your workload in college. The days of schools taking AP scores in order to let you not take a class and to count it as credit, those days are not so much with us. Fewer and fewer schools actually accept AP scores as college credit now. Some still do, and it's worth looking into. But more and more what you'll see is that schools will look at your 4 or 5 and say the English language exam and say, okay, maybe you don't need to take our English composition class. Or you might get out of a intro math class, and that lets you get into your major that much more quickly. So again, the kind of line here on APs that I want to kind of push here is that you should look at an AP as a chance to challenge yourself, but you also want to make sure that you don't bury yourself. Let's move on to subject tests. Okay, so subject tests are given several times during the year. We'll talk about that schedule in a moment. There's no course that goes with them. They're supposed to reflect the work that you do in classes at school. Each subject test exam, and these used to be called SAT-2s, they used to be called achievement tests if you're really old. Each one is 1 hour long. It's a multiple choice exam, completely multiple choice. They're given in August. That's the new test date this year. I imagine everybody knows that starting this summer, you can take the SAT or subject test in August. So it's offered in August, October, November, December, May, and June. In March, there are no subject tests offered. You can take up to 3 exams in a day. The way this works is you get a booklet, and it's got each exam in there. You can do them in whichever order you like. It's worth noting that not all exams are offered at all administrations. All right, we'll take a look at that list in a second. But before we get there, a couple other points to hit quickly. Each exam is scored from 200 to 800. There are 5 answers, just like on the old SAT. There is a guessing penalty, meaning if you get a question wrong, you lose 1/4 of a point. So blindly guessing on a subject test is not a good idea. If you can get rid of 2 or 3 answer choices, even 1 or 2 answer choices, then taking a guess makes sense. Score choice is a real option on subject tests. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you take a subject test and you're not happy with your score, you don't need to send it off to schools. All right? Schools will sometimes require you to send all of your SAT scores. A few schools will require you to send all your subject test scores, but generally speaking, when it comes to subject tests, they'll just ask you to send the ones that you want to send. Okay? So what are your options with subject tests? Here's the basic list of exams. You've got the 3 sciences. You've got an English Lit, Math 1 and Math 2. I'll say more about that in a second. U.S. History, and Spanish and French that are offered always. The World History is only in December and June. The Latin exam, actually I left that off the list, my apologies, is also offered in December. And in November, that's when you get the language with listening exams, all right? So languages like Korean, Italian, German, those are only offered in November. Math 1, Math 2. I want to say a quick word about Math 1 versus Math 2. As many people might already know, the story in the Math 2 that you often hear is that, oh, it's much, much easier, you can get a lot more wrong. And to some degree, that's true. So on the Math 1, typically, if you miss 1 or 2 questions, goodbye 800. On the Math 2, you can often miss multiple questions, something in the order of 5, 6, 7 questions, and still preserve an 800, and get a lot wrong and still have a score in the 700s. The Math 2 definitely matches what you're doing if you're a junior in high school, what you're doing in school now, much more than the Math 1. I used to be a very strong advocate for the Math 1 for students who weren't sure what they should do as far as taking, if they needed to take 2 subject tests. I recommend taking the Math 1 because it used to be the case that it mirrored what was on the SAT very closely. There were just a few extra topics on it. That's not true anymore. They revised the SAT last spring. They did not revise the Math 1 exam. So the math on the Math 1 no longer reflects the SAT math very closely. I mean, it's still math, obviously, so there's some connection there. But it's not the same kind of math and not the same patterns of math. There's a lot more material on the Math 1 than there is now on the current SAT. So it's less of an obvious choice for a student who doesn't know exactly which test to take if they're thinking, oh, I need to take some subject test. The Math 2 might be a better choice, but it's, again, a question of getting some practice and getting familiar with the exam. Important point, really important point to make about subject tests is that you should look at your score on these tests, not your percentile. So by percentile, I mean, I imagine this is a familiar concept. Every score that you get on the SAT is ranked by a percentile, right? So if you score like a 540 on the math section, that's about the 50th percentile, meaning half of the people who took the test did worse than you, half the people did better than you. 49% did worse than you, 50% did better than you. So the and people get obsessed with percentiles and want to get really, really high percentiles. If you look at your percentile on a subject test, you will almost always be disappointed, okay? On the Chinese exam, for instance, if you score an 800 on the Chinese exam, you're somewhere in the 50th percentile. What does that mean? It means that most of the people who are taking the Chinese exam are native speakers and the test is very simple for them. Subject tests have much smaller pools of students. The most popular subject test is the Math 2, and about 100,000 people take that every year. About 2 million people take the SAT, a little bit less than, but around 2 million people take the SAT every year. It's a much smaller pool. It's a much more self-selecting pool. So you get people who are good taking the chemistry exam. They're good at chemistry. With the SAT, it's a much bigger pool, so percentiles, I think, are a more accurate reflection on the SAT than they are on the subject test. So you want to look at your score. All right, what am I looking at when I look at that score? I want to look at numbers that are, if I'm applying to a very selective school, looking for numbers that are at least a 650 or higher. If it's a highly selective, like Ivy League school, somewhere like Amherst, somewhere like Bowdoin, then I might be looking even more at a score in the 700s. So that's one thing, is that you're looking at highly selective schools, 650 plus on your subject test scores. The other thing to look at here is how they compare to your SAT scores, especially the math and the literature. So let's say I have an SAT evidence-based reading and writing score of a 610. If I take the literature test and I score 690 on that, then that's great. It's showing similar skills to reading comprehension, but a much higher number. If I have a 690 on the evidence-based reading and writing, and I got a 610 on that literature subject test, that's probably not doing that much good for me. All right. So it's about comparing the subject test scores to your SAT scores. You want them to be basically around the same number, or even better, higher. If they're lower than your SAT numbers, then they're probably not doing you much good. What's a good score? I essentially just covered that already. So why would you want to take subject tests? And to some degree, it's the same as with the AP, that you're showing off your abilities. Couple quick points to make, though. No schools require APs. Some schools will allow you to use APs to apply instead of using, say, the SAT or an ACT, but none of them require it. It used to be the case that many schools, many selective schools, required SAT subject tests. That is no longer the case. The number of schools that are actually requiring subject tests has been going down year after year after year for about a decade now. The UC system actually started this. Once they abandoned the requirement of subject tests, other schools felt more comfortable doing so. So we are now at the kind of extraordinary number, for somebody who's been in this business a long time like me, of about 11 U.S. colleges as of the last time I checked on this, so it's possible somebody changed in the past week or so. 11 U.S. colleges that full-blown require the subject test for all students. Right? One quick addendum here is that there are some schools with particular programs that might require a subject test. Might have a college with an engineering program and they say, no, we want the math too, if you're going to apply to the engineering program. I'm just talking all people applying out of high school to be freshmen. The subject test is required by just 11 colleges. Since you're wondering what those are, here you go. Do you notice anything about them? Do they have anything in common? Look at number 2, Caltech, number 3, Carnegie Mellon, number 6, Harvey Mudd, number 7, MIT, number 10, the Webb Institute. They're all engineering schools. These are all schools that are looking for science and math subject tests because they want to see you doing work in science and math at a much higher level than shows up on the SAT or, to be frank, the ACT. These schools will probably carry on requiring it. The one thing to point out here is Harvard as a sort of. Harvard's policy is that subject tests are required, 2 subject tests are required, unless taking a subject test would put undue economic or financial stress on you. So if you can't afford to take subject tests, you could let them know that, all right, it's too expensive. Actually, you don't even need to let them know. You could simply not do so. You could not take them, and the assumption would be that it's out of, that it's too expensive. If you can afford to take subject tests and you're applying to Harvard, you should really take 2 subject tests. Which subject test is always a question, all right? One other thing quickly, well, yeah, let me cover this first and then we'll come back to which ones. About 100 other schools either recommend or consider subject tests, and this is kind of the most frustrating category when you're a student applying to college, being told that, oh, well, you don't have to, but we recommend it, right? So it's, you know, if you're going on a date, you may not be required to show up on time. It's recommended that you show up on time. So what's a recommendation? It's kind of a hidden requirement. You know that other people are going to be following that recommendation or following that consideration. So what that means is if you're applying to a school that recommends or considers subject tests, you should certainly sit for them. You should take 2 subject tests, see how it goes. If the scores aren't strong, you don't need to send them in. But if your scores are, as I was saying before, 650 plus or better than your SAT section scores, then they're worth sending in with your SAT. Before I get to what the value of these subject tests is, I do want to talk about which ones to take. So let's actually, we're going to go back a couple slides to look at the possibilities here. Okay, so looking at this list, it's not really the case that all subject tests are exactly equal. The sciences are all gold. Science subject tests are difficult. I know from working with my own students that in almost all cases they struggle on science subject tests unless they've done some preparation for the tests themselves. Most high school curriculum, the chem teacher, even the greatest chem teacher, doesn't cover quite all the material that shows up on the test. Same with physics, same with bio. So you need to get to know what's on the test, not just simply to be good at biochem physics. English Lit is a great test. The Math 2 and the Math 1 I already spoke about a little bit. That Math 1 is somewhat, well, it's not as great a test as it used to be because it's rather different from the SAT, and it's also recognizes easier than the Math 2. So if you're planning to be an engineer or a math major, the Math 2 is the test you want to take. U.S. history, again, great. World history, great. Language is the one I want to talk about. Languages are impressive. Languages are impressive if you are a non-native speaker. If you learn Spanish in high school, if you learn French in high school, if you learn Chinese in high school, you can take these exams and do well, great. If, however, you are a native speaker, you speak Chinese at home, you speak Spanish at home, it's not going to do as much for you as if you were a non-native speaker. Okay, so moving on to why would we want to take a subject test? Again, there's the requirement, there's a recommendation. It's also an opportunity to showcase your strengths and interests. Again, if you're planning to go into a science major, if you are talking about how you want to be a doctor one day in your essay, then it would make a lot of sense to have at least one science subject test in your transcript. Same thing if you're planning to be, you know, communications or journalism major, something like that, to have the English literature exam there. All right, so it's a way to showcase what you're strong at and what you're interested in. But it's also a good way to, again, stand out or measure up in a competitive field by taking at least 2 subject tests, 2 or 3, and being broad in the approach. So let's say I'm applying to Georgia Tech, and of course I'm taking Math 2 because everybody's taking Math 2 at Georgia Tech. I'm going to take physics as well because I love physics and that's what I want to study. Throw in a U.S. history or an English literature and do really well on that, you stand out a bit more, right? Or if I'm applying to, you know, go into a writing program because I'm going to be a poet one day, if you're a poet with a chemistry subject test, again, that can make you really stand out. Measuring up, again, is this idea that a lot of people who are applying are going to be taking 2 subject tests, so it's a good idea to have, you know, to make sure that you're on par with your competition. Subject tests can also help you skip some college prereqs, much like the AP can. Doing well, scoring over 700 on the English literature sometimes can get you out of English comps. Doing well on the U.S. history exam can get you out of a U.S. history core requirement at some schools. So that's another motivation. The last thing I really want to talk about as far as the tests themselves is when should you take them. You should take subject tests typically at the end of the school year, right? So generally what you're looking at is May or June. And what a lot of people do is if they're taking an AP U.S. history, they'll plan to take the subject test for U.S. history in June as well. It makes sense to take it at the end of the year because these are curriculum-based tests, and if you take them in the middle of the year, well, there's just going to be a lot of material you simply won't have covered. If you wait until August of the following year, well, you're going to experience that summer melt, right? That brain drain where you forget some of the things that you learned during the year. So for most of the exams, you really are looking at taking the test in May or June when it comes to subject tests. Literature is more of a reading comp-based test, and it's not so curriculum-based, right? You read poems and you read passages from short stories, novels, and essays, and sometimes you read from drama. That's not so much about, like, have you read Ernest Hemingway? You're not being asked to recognize the material on the test, you're just being asked to read it. So that's a test that isn't necessarily so important to take at the end of the school year. But the other ones, I'd strongly recommend. I guess the same with the languages. You could take them whenever if you're fluent. AP exams. AP exams, most people will take AP exams for the first time in junior year. English language is often given, AP English language, and composition is often given to juniors. It's not a bad idea to take an AP exam earlier if it's available. If your school lets sophomores take an AP exam earlier, it's, again, a way to stand out from other students. But generally speaking, I think it's junior and senior year that most students are looking to take AP exams, and you're on perfectly fine ground if you can't take an AP exam for the first time until your junior year. So how can we help? I mean, I think the one thing to say about both APs and subject tests is that, yes, they are tied to curriculum. They're supposed to match what you're doing in class, but they're also exams with their own idiosyncrasies. And getting to know the exams themselves, I think, is ultimately a very important thing. So Princeton Review offers tutoring for AP exams. We have a course, which Anna will talk about here in just a second. We have homework help as well. We have those three main resources that can help you get ready for both the subject test and for the AP exam. And so I'll turn it over to Anna now so she can tell you a bit more about our new AP cram courses.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James. So yeah, I just want to take a moment to explain to you guys about our new AP cram courses. These are debuting in the next couple of weeks and helping students to prepare for 9 different subject areas, which I will go over in just a moment. Just to give you a little background on what the course is all about. It is a 6-hour course divided into 2 3-hour class sessions. It is delivered through our live online platform, so you are able to take this course wherever you may be, out of the comfort of your home, as long as you have an internet connection. However, it is live instruction, so there is a live expert instructor on the other end teaching and reviewing all the necessary components for folks to get a good review right before their AP exam coming up. And also, all students will receive a copy of our cracking books. So those are, like, for instance, if you're taking the biology one, you would get the cracking AP exam in biology. So the 9 areas that we are covering are AP Bio, Calculus AP, English Language and Composition, English Literature, European History, Physics 1, U.S. Government and Politics, U.S. History, and also World History. So I just want to take a few moments and just get a better sense if anyone is interested in learning a little bit more about our AP cram course or options for our SAT subject tests and how the Princeton Review can help you. Please go ahead and just click an answer, whether it's yes or no. I'd just like to get a better sense. And if you are interested in learning more about our programs, we will have one of our folks get in touch with you within the next 24 hours to give you some more information. And so I'm just going to let that sit up there for just one more moment so I can make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to answer. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And James, if you could just go on to the next slide, I'll go ahead and give you guys some contact information. So if you do have any additional questions as we finish up this session tonight, after tonight, moving into later this week, all of a sudden you can't remember something that we went over tonight, feel free to shoot a question over to us using this email address at questions@review.com. And so now, James, I'd like to just go over some questions that we got during this session. And we'll try to make sure we're answering as many questions as possible for folks that have submitted things in for tonight's webinar. And so I'm going to go ahead. Are you ready, James?
I have to make one quick correction. As soon as I said that, I felt that wasn't right. AP multiple choice questions do not have a guessing penalty. They got rid of it in 2010, 2011, something like that. So it's the first College Board test that did that. And then the SAT, as everybody now knows, doesn't have a guessing penalty. You want to fill in everything. Subject tests do still have a guessing penalty. That has not changed. So apologies for the mistake earlier. No guessing penalty on the AP.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying that. All right. So I'm just going to jump into some of the questions that we received from this evening. So James, are subject tests really needed for college applications? If there is an example between how taking them could change one's application or how maybe it wouldn't change someone's application, would you be able to speak to whether or not subject tests really are required or needed for college admission?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good and fair question that I don't have the greatest answer to. I mean, when it's required, it's required. There's no doubt it's needed. One of my own students was applying to a, let's say, very prestigious tech school in New England and had not taken a subject test and got a call from the admissions department saying, hey, do us a favor, take a subject test. He'd only taken one. MIT requires, I just revealed too, MIT requires two. He hadn't taken a science subject test. They told him he needed to be considered for admission. So when it's required, it's required. Otherwise, if it's recommended, then, then it's recommended. If you can do it and get a good score, then you should absolutely do it. You don't need to kill yourself taking them again and again if you just simply can't get a competitive score. You don't need to send them in if your score is not competitive, but it's going to help. No, I can't give a case in which somebody who did offer one, or somebody submitted one and got in, and somebody who didn't submit one didn't get in, because all admissions is holistic, and there's no school that's going to admit somebody or not admit somebody based on just one single element.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we received this evening is, can a student take a subject test more than once if they wanted to try and raise their scores from their first time around?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all repeating subject tests. And again, with score choice, you just send the top score.
Okay. James, another question for you? Oh, I think we're having a little technical difficulties at the moment. Okay, it sounds like we are having some issues and folks cannot hear us. I apologize for that. James, are you still on, or did we lose you? Okay, it looks like we're having those issues. I do not know how or when James will be able to come back. I do apologize for that. One of the things that I will say is that we are able to answer all of your questions, and we'll be able to get back in touch with you guys individually for all of the questions that have been submitted. So I'm just going to end for, oh, hello, James, are you back?
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
Yeah.
we can hear you now.
Okay, good.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so can we finish some other questions? Are you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Fire
Thank
away.
you. Sorry about that. All right. So one of the questions that I was asking was in regards to whether or not certain subject tests look better than others for schools and on applications.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to that a little bit. I mean, I think basically all of them are good. The one thing to be careful with is the value of language exams when you're a native speaker. If French is your first language and you take the French exam, it's going to be simple for you. You'll probably quite easily score in the high 700s or really an 800. But that's not going to do nearly as much work for you as if you learned French in school and took it and got, say, a 710 or something like that. So they're all fine, but the language exams I would be careful with. And then the math one, as I was mentioning before, if you have a strong SAT math score already, getting another strong score in the math one will probably not do much of anything for you.
All right, thank you. If we could switch to, I think that question actually sort of speaks to both AP and SAT subject tests. But James, do you have any tips for studying or for time management while taking an AP course?
I think in the time management tip I always give students is if you don't set aside time for the work, then you're not going to do the work, and it needs to be very regular, right? It needs to be the kind of thing where 7:45 to 8:30 is the time that I work on this, and I think slow and steady works best of all. Cramming things into a weekend is not a good way to study for either test. Better to spend 5 hours in 1 week doing half an hour to an hour and a half a day rather than doing 10 hours in 1 weekend. So I think the smart thing to do is you set aside a time, somewhere in the neighborhood of half an hour to an hour and a half, 4 or 5 days a week, working on this material. You should have practice tests to be sure, and you want to make sure that you get familiar with the format. And as I was saying before, those free response questions, you have to practice those on the AP. It's really crucial to become comfortable with them because they feel very scary the first time you do it. You'll just think, I don't know how to do this, I can't do this. But then you do a couple and you realize, okay, these are quite doable.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question. Could you speak to how many AP classes should a student take per year during their high school career?
Yeah, I mean that's again a work-life balance question to some degree. There's no point in taking 5 APs. Nobody expects you to take 5 APs if your work is going to suffer because you're taking on too much, right? It's fine, I think, to take 1 or 2 APs a year. Many schools don't let people take an AP freshman or sophomore year. If you have a chance to do so and you feel up to it, it's a topic that you are indeed, it's a class you're interested in or plan to do some work in, then yeah, absolutely, freshman, sophomore year, go for it. But you shouldn't feel the burden of taking all APs or 5 APs every semester of junior year and every semester of senior year. Having 1 or 2 is going to look great. Again, average is most people on average take a single AP during high school.
Thank you. Okay. Another question that we got this evening. If for some reason you don't receive possibly a 3 or better on the AP exam in the course that you're taking, would the course still look good on your transcript because it's AP, even though you might not have done well on the exam?
To be sure, yeah, and this is a point I probably didn't make clearly enough earlier. Taking the class and getting a good grade in the class matters the most. Getting a good AP score, getting a 5 is good, it will help, but it's not the most important thing. Getting a good grade in an AP, taking the class, just showing that you've got the initiative to take classes that are going to challenge you, and getting a good grade in that class matter the most. And let's say you're a very math and science oriented person. You take the AP Lit class and you get an honorable B+ in that. That can look really quite good rather than taking the easy English class and getting the A on there as well. So it makes sense to challenge yourself, focus on your grades in the class rather than the exam scores. Also, of course, as a senior, as I mentioned, your exam scores don't matter at all.
Great, thank you again. All right, this one is a little bit specific in nature, but I think it's probably a question that a lot of folks have on their mind. So if a student wants to major in one specific area, let's say math, is it worthwhile for that student to put the time into, say, an AP English class?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that a well-rounded student is a desirable student at just about every college I've ever been in contact with and every admissions person I've ever spoken to. I mean, at a very math and science-oriented school, of course, the thing that matters most is that you can perform at the level in your math and science classes. But they're absolutely interested in having students who are also strong in the humanities. I've mentioned MIT once already, I'll mention it again. MIT has this amazing humanities staff. There's some incredible historians and literature professors who work at MIT. They would love to have a really smart engineer who's also super enthusiastic about Moby Dick in their classes. So yeah, totally a smart idea if you're up to it, if it's not going to end up tanking your GPA, to stretch a bit and take an AP class that is actually outside of the realm you plan to specialize in.
Excellent. Okay, this next question is a little bit more admissions related. So if a school requests 2 subject tests, but you only have taken one, or you're only submitting one, are you automatically eliminated as a potential student during the admissions process?
If it's required, then yeah. I mean, basically, yeah. Unless you have, this is where on the application you use that part of the application on the Common App where it says, is there anything more that we should know about your application? You'd have to explain it. You have to provide some explanation for why you didn't meet their basic requirements. But in a word, yeah, it's no good if they require 2 to just submit 1.
Got it. Okay. This question pertains to folks in like first semester senior year. Would that time frame be too late to take an SAT subject test for admission?
Nope. If you take a subject test in October of your senior year, that will still be good for early decision, early action, November 1 deadlines. And taking a November or December subject test will be fine for regular, certainly November, probably December, depending on the schools, should be okay for most regular decision schools. The only argument is the argument I made before against taking it in fall of junior year is that if you took chemistry the previous year, it may not be as fresh in your mind. But you can also kind of bone up on it. You can do a cram class to help refresh your memory.
Excellent. Okay. And I think I'm going to just take one last question for this evening before we wrap it up for tonight. James, can you give a recommendation on whether or not a student should be taking the SAT subject test in a course if they're already in an AP or an IB course?
Right. So if you're taking the AP class and if I'm taking AP U.S. History, should I also take the U.S. History subject test? Yeah, because they're going to look more at your subject test scores than your AP exam scores. Again, AP exam scores tend not to be considered so much. They can help, they can help, but they're not as much a part of the admissions picture as your SAT scores and for schools that consider them, your subject test scores. I also wanted to throw this in, because I didn't mention it earlier. With subject test scores, the general consensus on this is that they usually just help. They don't hurt, right? So even if a school requires you to send your subject test score from freshman biology, this is a classic. Teachers have students take the biology subject test at the end of the freshman year, and oftentimes people don't do all that well. And a school might require you to send all the subject test scores. Even if that score is weak, it's not up to par with the other scores, almost certainly it's not going to hurt your chances. Subject tests are really just kind of, they're icing. They add on to things. They tend not to take away, which is, again, all the more reason to take a shot at them, because it's a way to make your application even stronger.
Awesome. Okay, James, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for sharing your knowledge on AP exams and SAT subject tests. For those of you on the lines, thank you again for joining us tonight. You will be receiving a recording of this webinar within the next day or two through email. For those of you that did submit questions, we will be able to then go ahead and get some of our folks back in touch with you, so that way, so that you can definitely get answers to the questions that you were asking tonight that we weren't able to get to. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks everybody. Have a good night and good luck on the tests.